We're going to dive into a panel session, but somebody asked a question earlier on that I realized was remiss of me at the beginning, and I didn't actually share something that some people might find quite interesting. Clearly, one of the things we're keen on doing here, and one of the things that we are doing here, is having a conversation about research and about some of the evidence base, and also, of course, trying to explore a little bit further the kind of what does that actually mean, or how likely is that actually to be accurate, or because everything starts with a question or a hypothesis, and the reality is sometimes we have information to back that up, and sometimes we don't have information to back that up. So, but somebody asked about a report that comes out every year, and they just said to me, two people have asked it now, when is it coming out again? So I'm going to ask this question, and then I don't have to answer anymore. The Behave report, which again, if you think back to my accent, it won't surprise you to hear that Lisa, who's also a Austin Powers fan, was of course behind the fact that this Behave report. But actually, cybersecurity attitudes and behaviours, a report that ultimately looks periodically, actually annually, at the cybersecurity attitudes and behaviours of thousands of people around the globe in a variety of different countries. And we're currently doing the research and looking at the data, or we'll start looking at the data for this year's edition. The report doesn't come out till October, so kind of giving you stacks of notice now. And it's something that we're, again, really looking forward to sharing and comparing previous years. So those of you who've asked, when is the Behave report coming out? Now you know the answer. Not for some time, but yes, it is happening again this year. Well before the Behave report, we're going to have another panel. And I'm joined by Matt and by Angel. I'm going to let them both introduce themselves very briefly in a minute, but we're really just going to use this as an opportunity to kind of maybe explore some of the things that we've just heard over the last few talks from Mark. Actually, well, we're going to do all three. Actually, we're going to talk about all three talks, which is really important to do. So, so in that sense, maybe Matt, if I could come to you first, and you could just tell everybody who you are, what you do, and then Angel, if you could do the same too.
Yep. Am I good? Am I on?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, Matthew Canham. I'm the executive director of the Cognitive Security Institute. We're a nonprofit of professional practitioners and academics and other interested parties, very much focused on the topics that we are talking about here today. We've been around for about 2.5 years. We've grown by about 250% over the last year. We do weekly online meetings. I missed my first one today to be here, but normally the meetings are at 11 Eastern time on Wednesdays. And if you like what we're talking about here, actually we have several speakers. Calvin and Julie and Jason have all spoken. So anyways, if you're interested, please reach out to me and I'll get you set up.
Awesome. Hi there, everyone. My name is Angel Jordan. I'm the Infosec Training Awareness Leader at Synchrony, which is the #2 greatest place to work. Seriously. The news came out today, so we're #2 on that list, in case anyone's looking. Just want to put it out there. So yeah, I'm responsible for Infosec training, tabletop exercises, and the Global Security Awareness Program at Synchrony. I also like to rant a lot on LinkedIn about security awareness and educating regular folks about security awareness. So.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you very much. Maybe just to kind of add a voice to the plug for the CSI. If you don't know of it, or if you haven't attended any of those webinars and conversations, I think given the interest that this audience has, that is your space. Another group of your people all congregating and just listening to some amazing speakers. So we have two people who have been in the space for a very long time, like many people in the audience. I know also two people who not only think about and are interested in the research, but are actually interested in much of the application as well. And I think that's the thing that we're really hoping to use this section to do. So if that's okay, I thought maybe a really nice open question to start off with, which is kind of just share one or two. I know both of these people very well, so I know they're going to ignore me, or they're going to make one or two go on forever. But don't do that. One or two takeaways. I say that because we want to also kind of throw out to everybody else. So please, if you can start thinking of a couple of takeaways. A couple of takeaways that you've taken in the context of applying maybe some of the things we've heard from Sanchari, from Jason, from Mark, into either the organizations that you have worked in the past, the organizations you work in now. Angel, maybe you could kick us off.
Sure. So I guess my first note is that security awareness has an accessibility problem. I tend to talk a lot about security awareness in the context of the regular person, right? So if you tell, and I'm going to give my example, my mom is a 78-year-old boomer. And I can't imagine walking up to my mother and saying, Mom, security awareness is everyone's responsibility, right? Like, what is she going to do with that information? So we have an accessibility problem, we have an ego problem, right? Yes, security awareness and some of the tenets behind security awareness is everyone's responsibility. However, not really, right? Like, I get that we want to educate people on the security awareness, but I think we need to kind of strip all of the ego back from it and say, okay, what do we want people to do, right? We want people to protect their data. We want people to remain safe. I just think we need to remove some of that extra kind of nuance behind. And I know it's noble, it sounds amazing, it's a great talking bit, but you know, we have security teams hired. That is their responsibility. But for the average human, your responsibility is to protect yourself, right? So we need to kind of change the language a bit and make it a little bit less nuanced, or more nuanced. First point.
Angel, on that point then, so I'm thinking of Mark's presentation, which was excellent. Where's Mark? He's left us already. Drop the mic on the way out and let him down. Some of the things he was talking about were effectively that kind of comparison between religion and kind of, that's a whole nother level of caring.
Yeah.
When it comes to security. So is there anything that you thought, okay, well, we can take and draw on that and apply it? Or did you have any questions that maybe, or did you hear anything you thought, that's just not possible in the workplace as it relates to security? Did you feel any way?
I feel like when it comes to religion, right, it's a set of beliefs and behaviors that we want people to ascribe to, right? And I feel like that is what really security awareness is also sort of designed to do. Like, we have these beliefs, we believe these things. It's my job to help you understand why these beliefs are important and why you should also believe them. That's what I think about when you think about the parallels between religion and security awareness. Having people understand the belief system and actually accept and adopt that same belief system going forward.
Please.
I think the thing that struck me across all three talks was that we talk about human-centered cybersecurity, and I think something that even us here in this room today often neglect in that is the humanity aspect of it, right? And but with Mark's talk and with Jason's talk and Sanchari's talk, we're seeing the real impact that these things have on people. And so, like ransomware, it makes people actually afraid to use technology. It's something I advocate, and I know you've heard this soapbox before. Security awareness is not just keeping people from clicking on stuff, right? A few days ago, I read a story about, I think it was a 13-year-old boy that committed suicide after being sextorted. These ransomware gangs or these online criminal gangs, they don't really care where their money is coming from. They just care that money is coming in. And for them to exploit somebody to the point of that person taking their own life, they think nothing of it. And it kind of gets to another point that I wanted to make, is that there's so much focus on the organization, protecting the organization. And that's obvious because that's where the money is. I haven't figured out how to make money off of individuals yet, but at some point I would like to figure that business model out. But this is really important because it comes back to this suicide case that I mentioned, is that security awareness is far beyond don't click on something because you're going to compromise the place that you work for. It's about keeping the people that you love alive. So a talk that we had at CSI about 2-3 weeks ago, Mike Ross mentioned that suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people between the ages of 10 and 34. And I'm not saying that all of those people are being sextorted and committing suicide, but when you look at the causes of depression and anxiety and other things that are leading to this, a vast majority of these are coming from online sources. And so security awareness, it comes down to, yeah, don't send compromising pictures about yourself to unknown people, but also how do you just protect yourself from the deluge of the hyper reality of everyone has a more attractive life than I do, and some of these other things that start to fabricate these fictions. And this is kind of coming back to what Mark was saying earlier about just having the sense of being grounded, and this is where I think something like a religion can help to offset some of those things.
I noticed that in Synchrony's talk, I'm not doing a very good job of spotting our speakers. Yes, please do. I noticed during Synchrony's talk, one of the things that felt like it was coming out of that presentation was this idea of kind of segmentation of the audience, the workforce, society, the idea that maybe what's right for this particular group or helpful might not necessarily be exactly the same for this. And that strikes me as something that is kind of front and center day to day in the application in the workplace if you're trying to manage that aspect of a risk program. But Angel, just kind of help us understand a little bit more about kind of how does that kind of research or that aspect of the research bleed across into day to day? So
I think I talk a lot about my family when it comes to security awareness. So I think about my brother who was blind. He was sight impaired. He had limb loss. So when you think about, like, for example, we shared a Netflix account, right? Don't tell anybody else, right? We shared a Netflix account. And so, again, as a proper cybersecurity professional, change the passwords, use a password manager, complex or passphrases, whatever. And I was trying to send him my password. And he used a device where he's a screen reader. And the screen reader couldn't decipher what I was trying to share with him, because I would text it to him and he'd be like, well, I don't know how to do this. Like, my screen reader is not effectively helping me stay secure and I don't know what to do. So I had to change my password to a password that is easy for a screen reader to recognize. That's just a simple example. Another example is, like, if your face composition changes and you're using a biometric to read your phone, if you lose 30 pounds, you're in a hospital, you try to open your phone, you can't open it because the face doesn't recognize you, right? So that's what I think about when it comes to having to segment in different populations, especially if you're going to, launch a training to a global workforce. Do you have any idea of who you're educating, right? Like, for example, TikTok is banned in India. So I wouldn't have a security awareness content or article posted TikTok style, because half of the population wouldn't understand it because it's blocked. And so that's a matter of just making sure that you understand your audience. It's kind of learning one-on-one, right? You have to understand your audience before you educate them.
Orders of harm. That's another thing I wrote down here. Orders of harm. It was Jason. I don't like to refer to Jason's stuff because his head gets bigger and bigger as we go. He does a lot of good stuff. And orders of harm. I'm joking. His head deserves to be big. Orders of harm is something I wrote down because actually one of the bits of Jason's study was it kind of really helped us understand different types of harm, but also this idea of orders of harm. Matt, any thoughts on kind of that, not just playing out in the real world, but also maybe what we need to understand a little bit more about this idea of not just first level, second and third level orders of harm?
Yeah, well, a couple things. The first thing I'll say that, again, that I've learned recently, I never really considered about the harm that happens to criminals, which never occurred to me. However, a large portion of the criminal population they're actually slaves. They're indentured servants that have been kidnapped and actually are working against their will in data houses. And apart from that, there's another segment that aren't necessarily to that level, but they're very much exploited. And So Jason, well, sorry, I won't mention your name so we don't make your head.
Known as the academic who shall not be named.
It mentioned the HR departments. And so that was surprising to me from a previous talk that we had. But what was even more surprising to me was that many of these groups actually have counselors to help the criminals themselves work through the psychological trauma that they're experiencing, knowing that they are stealing the life savings often of elderly people. And when I learned that absolutely blew me away. I never considered that. So that's one side of the follow-on effects that I think aren't often considered. The other thing I'm really starting to think more about are how systems are interconnected. And so it's obvious we have cyber, we have physical, but we also have cognitive, and all of these domains interconnect and play off each other. And I think a great example of this are the follow-on exploits for the, as the aforementioned nondescript academic brought up,
We got to stop that now. Everyone, you can refer to Jason.
Nondescript academic, I love it.
But oftentimes ransomware is just that first exploit, right? It's then not only the ransomware, but we're also going to divulge all of your personal information. We're also going to report you to the regulatory body that's supposed to be protecting you. And we are also going to exploit all of your clients. And if I may interject just a quick anecdote on that, I happen to know of a plastic surgeon in the Southern California area that services very high profile celebrity types that was hit recently. And what you don't think about is those before and after photos. They're very high resolution because they have to be, and they can be used to make deep fake content very easily. So this is another example of follow-on effect.
One of the reasons I think this particular idea of orders of harm is important and helpful is actually, again, if I'm thinking about the kind of context, actually very specifically on the practitioner side, one of the things that I know is often a challenge for our community is to justify or demonstrate the impact and the benefit on the organization. And to a degree, there's a kind of real focus on risk reduction. If we do our jobs well, we will reduce risk for the organization because fewer people will do things, behavior, that are likely to introduce risk to the organization. That may or may not be true, and you may or may not be having to demonstrate that through some form of metrification or measurement. But there is actually, of course, more to it than that I think is sometimes overlooked. How is it that what we do helps an organization recover? There are things that I know that many of you do that actually helps the organization learn from and recover from incidents, which over time also saves the organization, not just money, but gets the organization more operational again. Or indeed, how quickly or how much time do we give back to the organization? So maybe changing what we do or adjusting what we do based on what works and what doesn't work, and therefore actually reducing the amount of time that people spend training and increasing the amount of time people spend doing what they do, but still helping the organization be effective. These are really important things that I think as a community are important, because then we start to be able to demonstrate value or not, ask ourselves if we're actually helping in those places, maybe beyond just risk reduction. So helpful. Autonomy. I wrote down this, and again, I think it was in Sanchari's talk, but it was also touched on in Mark's talk as well. Agency and autonomy. In fact, I think it was Mark who used language a couple of times about giving people choice, basically laying things out and allowing them to choose rather than necessarily forcing people to do things. And a couple of people here have talked about nudges, for example. And of course, anybody who understands nudges well will know that that's about choice architecture and of course, therefore, the ability for people to take it. But in security, we don't always, sometimes we rush to the answer. We want to control, and indeed, we want to take away choice. There's a balance there, Angel, is there not? not. What do you think about that as it relates to maybe research we could do in this area? Is there anything that you would draw from that?
I think that choice is important, but I think we have to first make sure that we have systems in place to allow people the opportunity to make choices, right? So if we are creating a dreaded, I know, phishing simulation, I know. If we create a phishing simulation and we give people the option to report, or we give them the opportunity to ask questions, we have to create a safe space to do it, but we also have to have some technical controls to sort of prevent some of that stuff from even getting to the end user in the first place. I think it's a combination. I think it's unfair for us to expect our humans I think it's unfair to call humans the biggest risk or whatnot, because we should have technical controls in place to prevent a lot of that stuff from getting to them. But that's when the layer of education comes in, and choice, right? So give people an opportunity to, in a safe space, ask questions. Like whenever I give any of my security awareness talks, the first thing I say, I set rules of engagement. This is a safe space. There's no stupid question. And you would be surprised how just that phrase frees people for asking questions that they may be afraid to actually ask in like real life situations. So.
I'm going to say something that's controversial, possibly. And somebody said something to me, I think I've shared it with a few of you before. They said to me, are you open-minded, Oz? And I said, yes, I am. I'm an open-minded person. And they said, in which case, you are closed-minded to the idea that you might not be open-minded.
Funny.
I thought about it like that before. But it was actually quite helpful because they were talking to me about something to do with security, albeit not necessarily the human aspect. We talk about education and training a lot. And very, very understandably. What if education and training isn't the answer? The example that was used to me to help me understand this was eating. Joel and I were talking about this earlier on, of food. Most of us in this room would probably admit we would like to or think we should eat more healthily. Maybe we don't eat as healthily as we think we should. If we were given the best training in the world, the most engaging education courses, how many of us think that would genuinely change the way that we ate? And the reason I ask that question is because I'm not saying it's not important, I think it is, but I'm just wondering in this context, is there anything that we can do here to kind of reconcile the need to train and educate with the reality that maybe that's not actually the answer for most people all of the time? What do you think? And I know, again, it's maybe controversial, but what do we think? Can I go to the audience floor?
What about remembering, though, that humans evolve, right? So they may not just do that today, but we change our minds also all the time and our behaviors. So as a training and awareness, making sure that we know those things, which I think lots of people know about foods, but we also learn. You read an article about sugar today, and you learn, and you may not change your behavior right away, but the information is there, right? And if you don't provide it, then how would you expect them to ever change their behavior would be my counter arguments to, I guess the question is immediate effectiveness. Like if you want an immediate return on investment, you might be disappointed, but I would not underestimate the psychology of humans, right? And what we do know about that we plant those seeds and that we make decisions later all the time. Sometimes it looks arbitrary, but they're there.
So it's a kind of seed planting for the point at which it's useful later on or becomes helpful later on. That's fantastic. Yeah, definitely. Please, another. Sorry, and if you don't mind, just say your name very quickly and where you're from, so just so people can kind of find you later.
Holmes Associates Inc. I'm here in the DC area, Management Consulting Advisory, Fractional CIO Services and CISO Services. I think what you're really saying is that sometimes the lack of knowledge is not the impediment.
Yes.
It's the lack of behavior change. And so it's ironic listening to this today. Just a couple of days ago, I was involved in a volunteer thing I'm doing around mental health and men's health. And we were talking about the fact that so many men have all these issues with being open and vulnerable and communicating. The long litany of things. Men are jacked up. And
Testify to that.
And we were talking about that, but on the call I was on, the group I was on, which is an initiative, they spend a lot of the time talking about, like, educating. Here's the answers, here's the answers. And what struck me is, and I said this to the team, I said, talking at people is not going to necessarily get you behavior change, because sometimes that's not the impediment. And how do you talk with people instead of talking at people? And I'm wondering if the same thing is true here, is that sometimes it's not just education. Oh, tell me more about the risk and now I'll change my behavior. It's all those other types of impediments that she was talking about earlier in one of her presentations. That's the problem.
Yes.
So just pure education alone isn't going to change that, because it's not the lack of knowledge that's preventing people from taking the right steps.
Thank you, Kirk. Super helpful. There are lots of hands going up. And,
I was next.
You were. That's it. There you go. In which case, next goes next.
Yes, I am. So, wow. So this is kind of a loaded question for me, because training for me, I feel like it it enhances a lot of technical controls. For example, AI, right? We have the, what is that tool that everybody likes to put in there?
ChatGPT.
Thank you. So ChatGPT, right? So we have a lot of organizations utilizing, that tool. However, we don't have any automated mechanisms in the meantime to kind of govern the users and what they, put in there. So, resumes, or they want to, my, schoolwork, et cetera. But the only way that we can train, staff in regards to the effective and security or secure use of ChatGPT is to train them, whether it's a 15-minute touch point, like you can use it, just don't put any proprietary information, don't put your social security number, don't add your address in addition to your, emergency contact, scrub it of all that information, put your general information, bring it back out. So it's interesting because it's kind of a two-part. I mean, no, a lot of people don't tend to pay attention while you're training, but then it's kind of needed because, again, we still have technology coming out that we don't have any automated mechanisms to kind of fight against it in the interim. So it kind of goes both ways.
Angel, please.
So,
and then we're going to come to you. No, Angel, you go first, and then I will come to this lady.
So there actually are governance solutions. Portal 26 actually is a filter over ChatGPT where you can see what people are putting in, stop them, block them. So they do exist.
Which technology?
Portal 26 is the
Portal
example
26.
that she just used.
Yeah.
So that is a great example, but well, I don't want to say unfortunately, because we grow, we mature, we evolve, but there are other AI-based tools that we do not have a way to measure how staff are using it.
Yeah, well, the AI metaverse grows by leaps and bounds, right?
Yeah. So I was just saying, but that's a good point. But I was just saying that in the interim,
yes, it's another layer.
It's
a good point.
Another, yes.
Angel.
But no, I was gonna add. I think there's a difference between learning, knowledge, training. They're all nuanced, but like for example, I'm gonna give the vegetable example, right? Like somebody hates vegetables. How can I get somebody to eat vegetables? You make them taste good, right? So make a little stir fry. Here, try the vegetable. I don't like vegetables, but try it. You might like it. And then they try it because it's prepared in a way that that speaks to them. So I think sometimes we need to kind of re-envision how we see training. Like I work for a regulated financial services company, so of course we have PCI, SOX, et cetera, right? So we have to have compliance-based training to say that we attest that we have provided people with this base level of knowledge as it relates to security education, right? We have to do that. We're regulated to do it. It's fine. But that is completely different from saying, hey, let me tell you a story about my grandmother who received a text from somebody saying that your Apple account was compromised. You need to call me right now and resolve this. And this is a true story. A friend, she got a text message, Apple Care, and thankfully she happened to be and she was screen sharing her actual checking account with this person who claimed to be from Apple Care or Apple whatever, and she ended up abruptly ending the call. She gently parented her and asked her questions like, okay, hey, why did you reach out to this person? Ultimately, she was able to stop the issue. They changed their accounts, got new email addresses. So anyway, storytelling is an effective way of learning that people don't leverage enough in corporate functions.
Thank you. I'm going to come to this lady here who very, not that one over there, this one over there. Not Ava, please. Yes, you. Okay. Yes, of course. I don't know your name. You tell us your name.
I'm Maya Makati. Going back to the whole storytelling, we've had a lot of success with storytelling at our organization in the last couple of years. It's made a lot of big difference in the receptiveness of even just the regulatory stuff that we have to do. And I think that while training and education, training can't be done in isolation. It goes back to the idea of, creating that culture. I think like the idea of, me saying like, I went through this experience and this is what I did, or being open, creating those safe spaces to have those conversations so that everybody, because I think a lot of people learn through experience, people learn in different ways. You have to really account for that, right? So watching the video might be really, it might be really motivating for some people, but then other people need to learn because, I went through this bad experience and now they've learned. Maybe somebody else needs to learn because of fear. It just varies. So I think that it has to be done. It can't be done in isolation, right? It needs to be part of a bigger program. It needs to be comprehensive. You do have to create that culture. Right?
Helpful. Last point on this, if you have it on this, Ava. Was it on this? Yeah.
When we talk about training, yes, I think training is helpful, but people make decisions. People have habits. There are like cognitive biases. There are reasons for why we do things. And I think that storytelling or, when we talk about religion, there's something that like sinks a little deeper and becomes more fundamental, or it helps us like maybe make better decisions or different decisions because we can recall it and touch it easier, right? It's hard to break habits. Training isn't going to break a habit, right? It takes more than that to achieve.
I knew this was going to get lots of hands up. And I'm going to keep us going, not because we don't want to hear it, but hopefully, if I'm honest, that this continues. I think it was a bit cheeky of me, but I did it on purpose because I think one of the things I really took away from those talks that we've heard so far is this idea of influencing or impacting behaviors, which I think for many of us feels like the quite a key step en route to the outcomes that we're trying to bring about. If you're not changing a behavior, then arguably the risk hasn't changed. It doesn't matter if people know more or know less, if the behavior didn't change. Equally, if people don't know why they did what they did, but they did it anyway, interestingly, your risk could have reduced, but maybe it's not necessarily sustainable. There's so many aspects to this that kind of being clear about what you're trying to do is key. And that, I think, is a lesson that we should really take from research. Good research is very clear about the questions it's trying to answer. And in some cases, clear about the questions it's not trying to answer in order to be able to ultimately move forward. So I guess in that context, behaviors, as practitioners who've either been in security for some time, work in teams or work with security leaders, as well as work with other security practitioners, how do you think about the difference between behavior and knowledge, and the link between the two? Because if it's not about or just about knowledge and understanding, but it's about other things, culture and otherwise, how do we kind of keep bringing ourselves back to behaviors? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it comes down to the metrics, right? But coming back to the question about training versus controls, I don't think anyone here would like an airline pilot that wasn't trained. But by the same token, you want to have those safety controls in place. And when we think about storytelling is literally the oldest form of learning that we probably have. And so bringing this back to the question of metrics, I think that that's really focusing on what our achievable outcomes should be.
Security behaviors, metrics, linking between education, training. Any thoughts on any of that? By all means, say no. But if you do, share them with us, Anja.
I think about going back to my favorite topic, phishing simulations. The board wants data. The board wants to see how we're improving. They want to see metrics. So we show how people are falling susceptible to phishing simulations. But that's not the behavior we want to, that's not a behavior. That's not the behavior we want to encourage, right? We want to encourage reporting, because then that way we can, the information ideally gets triaged and researched. So anyway, all that to say, it's challenging when we talk about reporting metrics and behavior, because people don't necessarily want to see the positive stuff. They want to see where people fail. They want to see, so it's difficult.
Okay. Please, Matt. Yeah.
So if I can follow up, thank you for bringing that up. Phishing simulations, the fruit fly of security awareness.
Agreed.
So a company or an organization spends money on a phishing simulation platform. They want to see that that's doing something, so they want to see the numbers go down. But numbers going down is by itself a meaningless metric, right? So NIST fish scale, a scale of difficulty of phishing emails is something I'm very familiar with. What you want to see is that people are failing on harder and harder phishing simulations over time, right? And something that I don't hear talked about a lot is that failing phishing simulations is actually probably a good thing. We want to kind of push that envelope a little bit, because that shows that people are learning, as long as they're not failing at the same level consistently. And something that I advocate for with clients is that you want test phishing emails and you want training phishing emails. And those are not the same thing. If you come up with some sort of baseline, like we want failure rate at X% for this difficulty of phishing simulation, fine, that's your test. But you can break this down into different groups according to ability. And you want to see over time people improving in what they're actually able to detect. That's what I would advocate for.
It's extremely helpful to hear. I know for a fact that, again, some people will maybe agree and some people might disagree. Maybe we'll just hear from a couple of additions. The gentleman who's in the suit, if you don't mind, and then the chap at the back.
Your thoughts and perspectives on the differences between accidental behaviors and negligent behaviors, and the mitigation steps, or the differences in mitigation steps that you take for each of those.
Accidental and negligent behaviors, the difference between the two. Anyone got any thoughts of that?
Well, so when we look at the error literature, so this is like James Reason, you'll see that errors are broken down into sort of two broad groups, slips and mistakes. And slips are when I come home and I have a piece of trash in one hand and I have my car keys in the other, and I throw the trash on the kitchen counter and I throw my keys in the garbage. I am very well aware that that was not my intended outcome, but because of distraction or other things, I performed the wrong action. But I had the requisite knowledge. A mistake is when you have the incorrect mental model, and if you had the correct mental model, you would have gotten to the correct outcome, but you had the incorrect mental model. Quick example of that, I love doing user interviews, because you never know what you're going to find when you ask questions. And my favorite one was somebody told me that they forward sketchy emails from their personal account to their work account because the security is better at work. And so if they open up the malicious attachment, it's much better to do it, there, because good security. Good reasoning, but just the wrong mental model.
An incorrect mental model. But I do think the question is a good one, because you're getting to, and it's actually, in Reason's work, he talks about slips, lapses, and mistakes, which are the three aspects. But your question is a really good one, because the truth of the matter is, and the reason, again, I think this is so important for this particular community, is anybody who's spent time in the behavior change space for some time will be aware of this idea of an equilibrium between restraining forces and driving forces. The reason that people do what they do is not actually often, or we often focus on the driving forces. What can we do and what can we tell people that will make them behave otherwise? We sometimes forget that there are a bunch of reasons why they might be behaving like that in the first place, and if you could remove the restraining forces or alter the restraining forces, it makes the behavior change easier. And so therefore the kind of unintentional behavior might be because of X, Y, or Z reason, and understanding those reasons is key. But it is important to differentiate, and I know we're going to hear from Calvin, hopefully is in the room somewhere. We're going to talk about human factors very specifically, a discipline, one that we actually touched on in lots of different ways throughout this, but really the security community is waking up very deeply to the fact that human factors has been thinking about this challenge for quite some time and has codified it. Hopefully, Calvin, you're going to share some of that with us maybe later. Thank you for the question. I suspect lots more to talk about it. One more question, please, from the back.
Yeah, Charles from MITRE, thanks. When we're talking about connecting this knowledge to actual behavior change, Matthew, you mentioned stories are the oldest form of that. I actually think there's an older form, which is seeing and then doing, which I think we could probably do before we had language. And I think that's maybe what we missed when we were talking about how do we improve training. We don't need to just tell people what to do. I've been a coach for athletics, I've been a tutor for technical topics. It doesn't matter what I tell somebody, they have to do it, and there's more learning from that. Yeah. So just during lunch, I got a scam text around an unpaid car fine. It has to be a scam, I don't have a car. So I go, I only have a work icon. It took me 3 minutes to find how to report it because the text was so small. I'm a Gen Z, and I still can't figure out how to report a text. I know I need to do it, yes. But until I have that practice, it will not change my behavior. Every time I get a phishing simulation, it always takes me a few minutes to figure out where the actual report button is. Yes. I still can't figure it out. I'm tech savvy. So I think that's what we really need to be thinking about. People are not changing behavior off of new information, they're changing behavior off of practice, and that at least removes the various areas of friction to them of keeping that.
And this is a beautiful link back to Sanchari's talk, where she was talking about us thinking about how we design what we do, or what we give people to do, with the intention of helping them actually achieve the action from the outset. And of course, whether it's privacy by design or security by design, that's at the heart of those, or some of those principles. We could talk about this forever, and indeed, in many ways, we should. We've literally just scratched the surface. But I think this is a really helpful and healthy way for us to just constantly remind ourselves that research is not happening in a vacuum, or at least it shouldn't be. Equally, those people who are sat in the audience who, when they leave here, don't have the luxury of just studying, researching, interviewing, thinking, measuring, but ultimately are literally trying to run programs and improve programs. Actually, there's a lot we can draw on and a lot we could continue to talk about. Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody with questions.